A few months ago, I found myself watching a video from a certain Mr. Carl Benjamin, which was itself a response to a video by fellow YouTube essayist Big Joel. My initial response was one of immense disappointment in my younger self, who actually used to admire this overgrown man-baby. Though I at first dismissed the video as the mad ramblings of an egocentric, I recently found myself reflecting upon the rhetoric of one specific part of Carl's video. The segment went something like this.
I'm not really very surprised, because Anis Sarkeesian seems to generally hate the concept of masculinity, and you don't look like you're very well served by the concept of masculinity. So I can believe that you think she makes good points, and I can believe that you find her very likable.
What I find to be most interesting about this segment is that it not only shows us that Sargon is a colossal douchebag, but it also reveals the intricate mechanisms of how traditional understandings of masculinity can lead to some truly toxic behavior. Oh yeah, and it also reminded me of The Art of Self-Defense. That movie was really good.
Today's lesson: to kick with your fists and punch with your feet.
That makes perfect sense.
Let's put this bit about Carl on the sidelines for now, because we'll come back to this big-cheeked chump later. The Art of Self-Defense is a dark comedy about Casey, a guy who, after being beaten up by some miscreants, decides to join a dojo and unlock the secrets of martial arts so as to better protect himself. It's a fantastic and hilarious movie, and the rest of this video will be spoiling some elements of the plot, so if you've seen the trailer, I guess technically you've already had it spoiled for you though, because, the trailer kind of reveals everything, unfortunately. So, I guess I'm not spoiling much at the end of the day. It becomes apparent pretty early on in the film that the dojo's rhetoric is full of goofy gibberish that appeals to a desired sense of tradition and masculinity.
I'm going to do some grocery shopping and rent a film to watch in the comfort of my home.
The dojo master imposes upon Casey an idea of performative masculinity that has him changing key components of his identity, from adjusting daily habits like petting his dog to changing personal taste in music, like moving him away from adult contemporary to more manly things like heavy metal. Yeah! The movie is all very tongue-in-cheek about these impositions and makes it clear that Casey is in no way happier or better off as a result of these changes. While that reality can make the film a bit dark at times, what makes the movie most enjoyable is the lengths that it goes through to mock what these characters are willing to do in order to look manly. One thing that becomes painfully obvious when we take a look at this film is that it's very clearly interested in the idea of toxic masculinity. Ooh, spooky libtard vocabulary. Now, since I used to think that toxic masculinity was a term that made it politically acceptable for gender studies students to hate men, allow me to give you an actual definition of the term. Toxic masculinity is a set of behaviors that, to be blunt, make you a giant colossal douchebag. We can see that toxic masculinity is all around us, on TV, in real life. Basically, anytime you see someone being an overly aggressive douchebag, you're seeing toxic masculinity at play. It's basically a set of behaviors that some men deem to be associated with manliness that just make them super unpleasant to be around. The actual academic definition is far less colloquial, but I thought it best to provide a more practical application of the term. While there have been other films that attempt to dissect the same issue, what The Art of Self-Defense does differently is that it highlights one of the key components that allows for toxic masculinity to function. Toxic masculinity is, by its very nature, cyclical. Let's take a look at what I'm calling the Eisenberg dipshit cycle. Please, folks, lend me your ear. In the movie, Eisenberg is attacked by some people. We see that he is bullied by other men during the same period. This leads to part 2, which causes him to join the dojo so that he can become more violent so as to defend himself. That leads to the dojo master slowly stripping away his identity so that Eisenberg becomes more violent, which then leads to him starting to join the dojo master on runs, in which they beat up random strangers. Finally, those strangers then see themselves as weak and ultimately seek the dojo out to restart the cycle. Of course, we later learn that the people who beat Eisenberg are the same people who are now teaching him to be masculine and violent. This is what is perhaps the most interesting thing about the Eisenberg dipshit cycle. It shows us that toxic masculinity presents itself as the solution for the very problem that it creates. Before we dive back into Carl, just thought I'd remind you all to drop a like if you've been enjoying this video so far, and subscribble if you think that you like film analysis videos. I know I do, that's why I make them. Okay, so back to Carl. What is he doing in this clip that I showed you guys, aside from ad-homming the shit out of Joel and demonstrating a complete inability to refute the claims? What Carl is actually doing is he's attacking Joel's masculinity. He's trying to make Joel feel insecure about his manhood, and in doing so, posture and assert his own manly dominance. Ugh, because when I see that face, I see manly madness. Ugh. In all seriousness, a younger version of myself would have been broken by words like this had they been targeted toward me. Younger men tend to be more insecure about their sexual identity and sense of manhood, so just seeing Carl bully Joel would have been enough for me to associate Carl's aggression and standoffishness as performative manliness, and Joel's calm and collective demeanor as being the antithesis of that. Carl's demeanor is telling of what many think of as traditionally manly. You can't take your opposition seriously. Are you dumb? You have to laugh and mock your opposition, compare yourself to a golden king, and be bullishly aggressive and assertive whenever you can. In other words, to Carl, to be a man is to dominate. What is perhaps most interesting about Carl's posturing is that based on its framing, it is seen as a solution to the effeminization of men. This problem of effeminization is one of the key reasons why Carl deems third-wave feminism to be one of the single greatest threats to the Western world. Clearly, this is a man who has his priorities in check. So if we were to apply the Art of Self-Defense's Eisenberg dipshit cycle to this situation, we'd see younger or more insecure viewers watching Carl assert his toxic version of masculinity to Joel, the viewer then seeing Carl's behavior as threatening to anyone, including themselves, who behaves like Joel, the viewer then perceiving Carl's behavior as empowering, the viewer, seeking empowerment, watches and learns from Carl. And last but not least, most importantly, the toxic cycle then recommences, with the viewer now perpetuating the same toxic behaviors and recruiting more impressionable or insecure boys and men to rinse and repeat the process. I personally know how this cycle works because, unfortunately, as I've mentioned earlier in this video, I was once a fan of Sargon's. I experienced this for myself, so the issue is all too personal to me. So, what are the solutions to this crisis of masculinity? I think that the Art of Self-Defense actually puts in a really good argument for what could be conceived as a positive notion of manliness. So at this point in the video, I'm going to strongly suggest that if you haven't seen the movie yet, you definitely stop watching it, because the movie is frickin' baller, and I'm getting into some really specific details pertaining to the ending, so please do yourself a favor and stop watching this video. I know you've enjoyed your time with me, and I've enjoyed my time with you, if I'm being honest. I really feel like we got a connection here, but seriously, it's not you, it's me. Please, fuck off, watch the movie. I'll see you in a week or so. Bye-bye. Okay, so you've definitely seen the movie now. So, as we all know, the film concludes with Casey facing off against the Dojo Master in a battle to the death. Casey knows that he's outmatched, but decides to fight anyway. The Dojo Master, ever confident, faces off against Casey only to have Casey pull out a gun and shoot him in the face. This is particularly hilarious because guns, at least according to the Dojo Master, are tools for the weak, and he has constantly touted that unarmed combat is the true measure of manliness. The Dojo Master's reliance on traditional norms of masculinity have literally led to his defeat in this case. He gets shot because apparently guns aren't manly. Did you hear that, America? It's all about using your fists. Standing over the corpse of his former master, Casey says the following.
I came up with two things, and I don't want to second guess my choice later on, so I'm going to say both. First, you would say that using this makes me a weak man, and without question it does. But I am alive, and you are dead, so I would argue it makes you the weaker man. The second thing I came up with is from a film I saw once. I didn't play by the rules, but there never were any rules.
Aside from this line being totally badass, it lets us see that Casey has broken free of the arbitrary restraints that society has placed upon him, and allows for him to restructure the culture of the dojo into something that's far more conducive to everyone's happiness. Primarily, he gives his female colleague the role of dojo master because she deserves it. She's the best fighter out of everyone there, and was only held back from teaching adults because the dojo master proclaimed that the social function of women is birth and child rearing. Hey, doesn't that sound familiar? The film's ideal version of masculinity is based on the historical dynamics that have existed between the genders in prior moments of the film. Men used to be encouraged to make sure that they dominated conversations with women, that they were rash and bullish. I admire the idea that men should be responsible for their families and should be brave and intelligent, but I don't see those factors as being necessitated by their gender. You should aspire to those things because you're a human being, not because you're a man. I'm by no means a gender abolitionist, though. As a matter of fact, I think that the solution to society's masculinity crisis is to come up with better notions of masculinity through strong role models. Casey is a great example of masculinity. He not only listens to what women have to say and is accepting of women taking leadership roles, but he also actively helps to encourage and create spaces where such things are possible. In recent years, my ideal version of masculinity has basically been summed up through this one man. When I look at Joel, I see a man who's willing to listen to others, and based on his tweets is kind of desperate to look for good faith criticism, so who knows, you might be a target in my next video, Joel. Foreshadowing. I see a man who's patient, respectful, who methodically structures his ideas and is willing to give people the benefit of a doubt when possible. I don't know Joel personally, but when I look at him, I see a role model. Someone who I can show to my son someday and go, that's what it means to be a man. In conclusion, I'd like to go back to that bit with Carl Benjamin, where he says that Joel is not served well by masculinity. I've come to see those words as what they really are. They're the dojo master, saying that if you don't punch with your feet and kick with your fists, that you're not a man. That, being respectful and polite and empathetic are signs of weakness. Carl is the dojo master, and Big Joel, with his politeness and his respectfulness and his kindness, is the gun. And we all know what happens to the dojo master. And I suppose, like Casey, I had trouble choosing between two conclusions, so I'll leave you with my second one, that way I don't have to live with guilt. What is perhaps most ironic, to those of us who are paying attention, is that the very words that Carl is using to belittle Big Joel are what makes him but a fraction of the man that Joel is. Thank you so much for watching. Please watch The Art of Self-Defense. It is hilarious and incredible, and I give it like a 9.5 out of 10. It's seriously that good. If you liked what you saw, do the usual stuff and hit like and subscribe and all that, and just also follow me on Twitter for maximum gravy. Manliness.
Hey everybody, I'm in Italy right now, still in the middle of the pandemic, so I thought it might be fun to reach out the window and do a little singing. He was a boy, she was a girl, could it be any more?